Good morning. Welcome everyone to our latest in our series of conversations with the candidates running to be the next mayor of our great city. Today, we welcome Andrew Yang, the political newcomer and entrepreneur who has shaken up the race. A lot of us came to know Andrew for the first time through his 2020 presidential campaign, where he made his mark bringing outside of the box ideas like universal basic income into the political and media mainstream. But over the past couple of months, we've gotten to know Andrew as a fellow New Yorker and as a candidate for the mayor of the city of New York. Since moving to the city 25 years ago, he's gotten an up-close view of many of the things we care most about here at Abney. He knows how to start and run a business and the challenges that come with it. He knows the pressures of nonprofits are under on a daily basis. And despite being a political outsider, he's built deep roots all across the city. Right after announcing his candidacy, Andrew quickly distinguished himself as an energetic and unconventional campaigner. Like today, he's speaking to us from a commercial office building with a message for all New Yorkers. Barnstorming the 5 boroughs in person, he broke out of the Zoom box to meet with voters out in the neighborhoods. And I'd like to thank him for hitting the streets of Laurelton, Queens 2 weeks ago. And while he was there, he visited my partner's UPS franchise store. Thank you, Andrew.
Oh, that was a wonderful visit. That store does so much for the community. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's and we are so honored that you were able to join us. I wasn't there, but we were so honored.
I would have remembered you if you were there.
Andrew is really pushing big ideas, like putting the city back in charge of its subways and buses and increasing cash relief for low-income New Yorkers. And in response to the wave of hate crimes and violence against our Asian American brothers and sisters, he's rallied with communities all across the city in solidarity, and his campaign has taken on a new symbolism. He believes we must take what we've learned in the pandemic and create a truly modern education system that can serve as an example to the rest of the world. And as a parent of a child with autism, he understands that we need to find a way to make sure that all children with unique needs can have them met by our public education system. Despite these troubling times, Andrew has struck a distinctly positive and optimistic note on the trail, evoking the same happy warrior we saw on the presidential campaign. And in order to create affordable housing across the city, he plans to allow communities to lead the charge in creating rezoning and development plans so that they can maintain their own identity while expanding and grow their affordable housing stock. And today, he joins us to talk about something on all of our minds: how to bring back hundreds of thousands of office workers vital to the city's economic recovery. As many employers are reconsidering their office needs and looking to build new hybrid work models, we know that one of the biggest advantages of our city remains being our ability to bring people together physically, to spur ideas and innovation that the city has historically been known for. So with that, Andrew, I welcome you to Abney, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. What a tremendous introduction. Good morning. Hello, Abney members. Thank you for hosting me today and for your work on behalf of our city. It's a pleasure to speak with all of you about how New York City can not only regain its stature, but also enter the next great era of our city's history. And as almost said, this is a very, very difficult time. Our city is badly wounded economically. We're missing over 85% of commuters and over 95% of tourists. I chose to speak with you today from 1180 6th Avenue because this is a typical Midtown office building, and we need people working here again. As you all know, an office building like this one at this hour would normally be absolutely teeming with New Yorkers, commuters, and visitors, running to a meeting, heading in for an interview, each building its own mini metropolis, 1,000+ stories and dreams intersecting in elevators and hallways and offices throughout the day. Now we're doing this over Zoom, We are all stuck in Zoom purgatory, still mostly meeting virtually and still siloed from the human interactions that make us whole and drew us to this city. Companies can get by on Zoom, as we've seen, but here's the message we have to pound loud and clear: companies cannot excel over Zoom. Research has shown that workers are more creative and innovative when we are physically together. The same is true for academics. Research is stronger when the people that are producing it are geographically proximate to each other. New York City is fundamentally about bringing people together, and the facts show that this is what helps organizations compete and succeed. And I've got news for workers too. A lot of us are sick and tired of Zoom anyway, but workers should want to avoid totally remote work. There's a joke going around the internet that promotions don't happen over Zoom. Wages may go down over time. Kevin Roos of the New York Times said recently that if you're working remotely, you are one step closer to your job being automated. This is not our future of work, not just for our own individual well-being, but for our city's sake. What separates New York from everywhere else is that the energy of our people is greater than the sum of our parts, and that the talent and culture here are second to none. It's why your companies, nonprofits, and organizations pay a premium to be located here. It's why my companies, nonprofits, and organizations paid and still pay a premium to be here, and why we have been successful. New York City is a place-based economy, and Zoom is not our friend. We cannot let COVID become the moment when businesses decide that they don't have to be here, and we cannot keep giving them a city where they can reasonably conclude that they should look elsewhere. Spurning businesses or failing to uphold the city's value proposition, or letting politics overcome the blocking and tackling of running a city, has the potential to lead us into a downward spiral that other cities have never recovered from. And know this, our city's comeback is not assured. It's not a sure thing. We have to compete and execute and have a vision. Getting government agencies working again is only part of it. We will have to activate the private sector, which many of you work in, the nonprofit and philanthropic sector, and even our technology industry to get our city back on track. Together, we can bring our city back and make clear that this is hands down the best place to build a life, a career, a family, and a world-class industry-leading organization like many of the ones that you all work in. And as I've been saying on the trail, and you heard a little bit from my bio, I owe this city everything. I arrived here as a 21-year-old law student. After I graduated from Columbia, I joined a law firm, Davis Polk, not that far from where I am right now. I then helped to found and lead a .com that did not work out. So I do know how hard it is to start a business, but I got the bug. I found my love for entrepreneurship and problem solving. By the time I was 31, I was CEO of an education company, Manhattan Prep, that grew to become #1 in the United States in its field and eventually was bought by a public company. So for those of you who are working in a small private company, I get it. It was in that kind of environment that I learned how to manage people, how to grow a business, how to make the numbers work. This is the kind of opportunity that New York makes possible. And after that company was acquired, I founded a nonprofit, Venture for America, that is headquartered right here in New York. And it helps create jobs and develop talent in underinvested cities around the country. VFA has now welcomed over 1,000 fellows who have collectively helped generate over $115 million in investment capital. That too is New York. I could never have started that organization in any other environment. After that, I launched a presidential campaign, which is when many of you got to know me, that advanced important ideas about our economy and helped get cash relief to millions of Americans. And that campaign was only possible because of my friends right here in New York City, who decided to back, frankly, a highly improbable run. So New York City has been great to me and my family. It's given me the kind of career in life I could only have dreamt of when I showed up here 25 years ago. But we have to acknowledge that even before the pandemic, our city was not working for far too many families. During the Bloomberg years, we didn't focus enough on addressing the rampant inequality that unfortunately has grown worse. During Bill de Blasio's administration, we've ignored the private sector and businesses. Buzzwords have replaced action, and spending, bureaucracy, and new programs proliferated without any consideration of results. It's left us ill-prepared for a public health crisis, followed by now an economic and jobs crisis, budget deficits as far as the eye can see, and an affordability crisis in housing and other sectors. Worse yet, now violent crime is increasing, including against Asian Americans. Trash is piling up. We have suffered rates of COVID infection and deaths, 30,000, far greater than other cities that are comparable to New York City. Confidence is shaken. Again, there is no guarantee that our city will come back from this the way we want it to. This is why I'm running for mayor. Now is the time for an independent mayor who represents a break from the past. We need a mayor who will match New York's energy and vitality, a mayor who will be a proud salesperson and cheerleader for New York. If I'm fortunate enough to be our next mayor, I will enter City Hall not owing anyone except the people of New York City. I'll follow facts, not the priorities of special interests. I'll fight for what is right, not what's going to avoid an unfavorable press cycle. I'm so glad that Mela referenced my travels throughout the city. It's been so meaningful to talk to one New Yorker after another, particularly small business owners who are trying to make it work, and have them share their enthusiasm about our campaign and plans for a comeback. As mayor, I will show New Yorkers what it means to have a mayor who is focused on job growth. It is unacceptable that some of our most important companies are moving jobs to Florida. And as I said to the Bloomberg editorial board, it's embarrassing that in just about every case, we didn't even try to keep those jobs here. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with Robin Hayes, the CEO of JetBlue, about his company and keeping operations in New York as a central part of their future. And it was a great conversation. Robin conveyed that JetBlue loves New York City. They've been incredible friends to New York City with a headquarters in Queens, a hub at JFK that we've all been to and love, a partnership with New York in their relief commitment to Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, which is obviously a cause that's near and dear to many New Yorkers. The city's next mayor needs JetBlue and other companies like it to know that they are a vital part of the fabric of this city. They're going to be a key to our comeback. I will fight to get entrepreneurs and businesses to come here and stay here. I will promote New York City to tourists and visitors from all over the world, and I will enlist the best talent from every industry to bring real creativity and energy back to city government. I am no stranger to making a case that others might not see. I launched a presidential campaign that not too many people were calling for before it happened, but that campaign over time turned into a movement that rallied millions of Americans around a vision of a more human economy. After serving as a surrogate for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I flew down to Georgia to campaign for Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff at a time when a lot of people were writing those races off. But we won, and Democrats are now in charge, and it's resulted in tens of billions of dollars of aid right here to New York City. Thank you, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And thanks to Chuck Schumer and President Biden, cash relief checks and this new monthly child tax credit are the foundations of the American Rescue Plan. These policies will help cut child poverty in half over time, and New York's economy and small businesses are already feeling the results because of the stimulus checks that are going straight into our local businesses. I ran for president and campaigned in Georgia not because someone else thought it was a good idea, but because I thought that they were the right things to do. And that will be the theme of my administration. What is the right thing to do for New York City? I called for schools to reopen because it was the right thing to do. That was clear to me as a public school parent and a parent of a special needs son. My wife Evelyn and I can see that kids need to be in school, particularly at-risk children. I called for city control of the subway because it was the right thing to do. This was clear to me as a subway rider and bus rider and New Yorker. How can we champion and manage our city's recovery if we don't control the way New Yorkers get to work and school every day? I called for the dismantling of needless scaffolding because it was the right thing to do. I know that some people make money from the constant scaffolding, so what? That means we all have to accept a worse quality of life that stifles small businesses that we can't see under the scaffolding. That is not how we will govern. I called for the conversion of vacant hotels into affordable and supportive housing that we can get done at half the cost and the time of new developments. That was clear to me as an entrepreneur who knows an opportunity when he sees one. And I called for the full funding of the Asian Hate Crimes Task Force because it was the right thing to do. It's been heartbreaking what's been happening to Asian Americans around our city, volunteers alone should not be asked to respond to this hateful violence. It requires a real institutional response. In every case, I will be driven by one thing: what is best for New York City? Now, not everyone will agree with every decision I make. That is the nature and beauty of New York. If someone's not upset at you at any particular moment, you're probably not getting much done. And though New Yorkers may not agree with everything I do, they will appreciate that I'm acting based on what I believe is the best thing for New York City. New Yorkers know full well that I'm my own person with my own point of view, and that frankly is why I am the favorite to win this race and be your next mayor. I'm running for mayor for a very simple reason. I see a crisis and I believe that I can help. Beyond a cash relief program to help those in extreme poverty, I will launch a people's bank that will help New Yorkers join the mainstream banking system. 11% of New Yorkers don't have bank accounts and waste on average $600 a year on check cashing fees alone. This is in the world's financial capital, 11%. This is a genuine problem we can solve for people. It should not be this expensive to be poor. The People's Bank will also guarantee hundreds of millions of dollars in affordable loans to small businesses in minority communities to help meet my goal of 15,000 business openings or reopenings during my first year as mayor. And we're going to get out of the way for small businesses. We're going to give back sales tax collections to bars and restaurants for a fixed period so they'll have a little bit more money in their pocket to hire workers and make rent. No other industry plays such a key role in both our economy and our culture. And we will declare a moratorium on fines for small businesses and a correction period so that we're not standing in the way of businesses reopening their doors and families trying to get back on their feet. As we look past this immediate crisis, we can't wait to embrace new industries, new projects, and new jobs. Just yesterday, I was in Long Island City to support a proposed geothermal power plant. Now, negotiations have been drawn out, and this $250 million project remains uncertain. But we can help. That project will start under my watch, and it will finish under my watch. It will create at least 1,000 jobs and reduce carbon emissions in our city for decades to come. This will be the first project of many. I will be a mayor who builds and rebuilds this city to more closely resemble the city of the future that New Yorkers know we deserve. We have our work cut out for us. As an entrepreneur, I like to take lessons from the experiences of others. That's a bit of a secret, but entrepreneurs like to take ideas from others. I don't know if people know that. Like there's actually like a lot of that going on. But when I look at the experiences of others throughout New York's history, I look to Ed Koch, who rallied our city after the fiscal crisis when President Ford told the city to drop dead. Now, we're not getting that from President Biden, thank goodness. He loves New York. But Ed Koch was hardly perfect. He had major missteps, but no one could doubt his love for our city and his ability to rally New Yorkers to be their best selves. He was a cheerleader when others left the 5 boroughs for dead. He put the city before himself, and the world noticed. Investment returned. He believed so that everyone else could believe again themselves. He injected our city with spirit, and that is what New York City needs right now. When I go to Yankee Stadium for opening day after the speech, I'm going to opening day. New Yorkers will see a mayoral candidate actually excited to welcome them back, not just to the stadium, but to a way of life. The divisions and fighting for the past decade have led to a city that is now limping along. I want us to be optimistic about the direction of our city again. We are wounded, but we cannot afford not to come together and save this miracle of a city so that our children can enjoy the same opportunities that we have enjoyed. We need a mayor who will reach out and work with all New Yorkers, who is driven not by ideology, but what works. And that is what New Yorkers have been waiting for. I hope you will join us. We will need every single person on this Zoom watching this right now to get this city we love back on its feet. So thank you, Abney. Thank you. And let's go New York City. We're going to do it. Appreciate the heck out of you and happy to take some questions.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. So I guess let's start by digging deeper into how one would restore the economy, how one would refill the offices and the office buildings you're in. So you say Zoom is not our friend. We also here strongly at AMI believe in bringing people together and that value. But, you know, obviously some of our people we work with have moved away. Some are quite happy at home. How do we get them back? And how do we keep them? Because if we don't, we're kind of in trouble as a place with the density that we have.
You're completely right, Steve. So there are two things we have to do immediately. The first thing is I talk to CEOs all the time, and the vast majority of them want people back in the office. When I talked to one CEO of a major company, he was saying early May. The city is saying early May. So the first thing we have to do is support companies bringing their workers back, where right now the city making that move has been very helpful, but we have to essentially build a consensus for private companies that bringing your workers back is the right thing to do, and that doing so, frankly, is not a risk to them or their families, and that it's vital to get New York up and running again. But bigger picture, to fill an office building like this one, I think we're going to have to invest some resources. Now, a number of months and years ago, there was an idea put out there for a commuter tax. I'm sure people at Abney have heard of some of these ideas. The thought was if someone's commuting into the city, they're benefiting from the city, but they're living someplace else and paying taxes someplace else, maybe we should levy a tax on that person. I'm suggesting that we're going to need to do something essentially the opposite. We're going to need commuter incentives. We're going to have to actually provide either individual tax breaks or incentives, or employer tax breaks or incentives for workers who are commuting into the city 5 days a week. Because right now, a lot of what I'm hearing from CEOs is that they're going to move towards a hybrid model where someone's going to be in the office fewer than 5 days a week. And when someone does not come into the office, it's not just bad for that organization, it's bad for the security guards, the cleaning staff, the food truck operators, the retailers, the bars and restaurants that ordinarily would serve that commuter. So under my administration, we will actually be exploring incentives for both individual workers and companies to encourage commuting, because I believe that's going to be vital to trying to fill some of these buildings up. The third thing is an acknowledgement that even if we fight like mad to try and get people back into the office, there are going to be a number of commercial buildings that should be repurposed and frankly converted into affordable housing and other uses, because even optimistically, a lot of these offices will not come back as commercial office spaces. Some organizations are permanently going to shift their footprint, their office needs. And so we have to face facts that we should start that adjustment as soon as possible.
You talk about tax breaks and incentives. There's a very different conversation going on in Albany at the moment. And so I guess how do we remain competitive? We have a challenging regulatory environment, and we will most likely, there's a reasonable chance we are the most expensive tax state in the nation at the end of this budget. Possible, or we're number two. And I say less that so that we compete against Miami and Austin, but more, let's say, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, places that have at least similar structures. How do we compete in this environment, and how would you go about dealing with Albany, given where the legislature is at the moment?
Well, first,
on taxes particularly.
First, it's imperative that the mayor has a constructive relationship with Albany, and we've frankly seen the result of a dysfunctional relationship over the past number of years, where we've not been able to get a lot of things done for New York City. The mayor's job is to deliver for the people of New York City, and so you don't have a choice but to have a constructive relationship with the governor and the legislators in Albany. I want to be realistic about New York City's value proposition vis-a-vis taxes. So right now, the difference between New York City and Florida in terms of tax rate is approximately 13% if you're an LLC or you're a sole proprietorship where you own your own business. That is very, very significant. 300,000 people have left New York City during the past year, and a number of those people were very, very high earners or business owners who went to lower tax areas like Florida or Texas. That is just, these are just facts. Now, the goal of raising taxes is to generate more revenue. You do have to keep in mind, though, that it's not like the taxpayers are necessarily fixed in place. If you raise taxes at a level where people actually vote with their feet and also head to Florida, then you're not serving the policy's goal, which is generating revenue for the state of the city. So to me, we have to acknowledge that reality, have a balance around frankly, trying to have a realistic view of how much revenue a particular tax increase is going to raise, and then fight as quickly as possible to reconstitute the value proposition of New York City with this argument in mind. New York City has always had higher taxes than Florida. But the reality is that people have been happy to pay that premium, one, because their opportunities here are better. Like their companies will do better, they'll make more money. But there are a lot of other reasons too. The schools are better, the cultural amenities are better, their friends are here. And the problem with this past year has been we've essentially struck down each of these elements of the value proposition one by one. Or, frankly, the streets feel safe and clean here. Like there are a bunch of things that we've called into question. And so if you close the schools, there is no Broadway, you don't feel as safe on the streets of New York, and you feel like, that there is another environment that's rolling out the red carpet, then you start to think about it. So even as you're having a frank conversation with Albany saying, look, we get the goal is to increase revenue, but let's figure out like if there's going to be a behavior change that you're catalyzing, and then also fight like mad to make it so that New York is worth the premium, because we're never going to win a low cost battle with the Floridas and Texas of the world. We have to win the premium battle.
Thank you. We certainly believe in winning the premium battle, and feel that we have the diversity and the people to do that in this city. You had mentioned two administrations. You talked about the Bloomberg administration and the rise of income inequality in that time. And you talked about the current De Blasio administration, and really it's let's say weak relationship with the business community. How does one do both in this town? How do you have care for those who need it the most and maintain economic strength? Because it has felt politically that people have either sort of landed more on one side than another.
And I think that's a colossal missed opportunity. I'm going to tell a few stories that got me excited, and hopefully they'll get you excited too. I don't know how either depressing or uplifting you found, my speech. Like it could have gone either direction.
We love your optimism. We love your optimism.
Oh, so here's the good news. And as someone who's trying to manage the recovery, so bad news: we're facing a $4 billion plus annual operating deficit for the next 4 years plus, as far as we can tell. And we have a whole array of challenges, as illustrated by the setting of my speech. The good news: we're getting directly $7 or $8 billion in direct capital into the city, and then an additional $50 billion or so in various measures statewide, Save Our Stages for Broadway, stimulus checks. Like if you add it up, there's a very, very significant amount of capital coming to New York City. So we're going to have a bridge for, in my opinion, 1 to 2 years that we need to utilize as effectively as possible. And here's another cause for optimism. I've spoken to now 3 CEOs of really major organizations who've each said to me independently, we are poised to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in New York City if we have a mayor that we can work with. And I heard this and my mind was blown, because I thought to myself, how on earth could any mayor not want to work with you on getting hundreds of millions of dollars invested into our city? But then I realized that they don't feel that way about the current mayor. And they may not feel that way about like some of the other, frankly, candidates in this race. So it is, in my mind, just in everyone's self-interest to both strengthen the economic environment and the business climate in New York City, and then use some of those resources to help people in poverty, help people stay in their homes, help get small businesses reopened. Like no one, in my view, is not on this page. Like when I talk to these CEOs, they're on board with the fact that we need to help people who are struggling right now. And frankly, most of the people I talk to who are struggling just want their own situation to be better. Like they don't care about castigating, some CEO in another borough. They just want their block to be better. They want their trash picked up. They want their kids' school opened. New Yorkers are all on the same page. And this, to me, Stephen, is an example of how politics has distorted our ability to get things done. All New Yorkers are unified in a desire for a comeback, regardless of whether they're, thriving right now or struggling.
Thank you. You mentioned looking at commercial spaces, potential affordable housing space. I'd love to go a little bit deep into affordable housing. It's always been something people have talked about. It's never quite something that materializes well enough to meet the needs of New Yorkers. How do we change that? How do we get a new cycle here? How would you get a new cycle here for us to get more?
So this is the opportunity amidst our challenges. And if you look around, you can see the empty office buildings, the empty hotel spaces. I spoke to a nonprofit developer who has a bid right now in an empty hotel. And they're telling me that they can turn that hotel into affordable housing in half the time at half the cost of ground up construction. And what they would need from the city is forgivable loan or grant of about 20 to 25% of the value of their bid so they can win that bid. They're bidding probably against some private equity firm who just thinks, ooh, if I buy this hotel, like, I sit on it for a while, eventually it'll come back, I'll make money. And then you have this nonprofit developer who wants to turn it into affordable housing. And they say, look, like if you give us this layer of capital, then we can get this done in half the time at half the cost, which frankly makes common sense because the hotel is pretty well set up for affordable housing units. Commercial office spaces are a very, very different picture. It's a much bigger pain in the neck to convert office spaces into affordable housing, frankly. If you just think about the plumbing, like in the average, office space, like you need to do a lot of things to try and turn it into apartments. But the hotels are a massive opportunity. And I'm saying this even as someone who frankly is going to be gung-ho encouraging tourism from day one. Because if you're down from 65 million tourists to, let's call it like probably, realistically, maybe 2 million tourists right now, like it's not going to bounce back from 2 to 65 in 2022 or 2023. A lot of the tourism that we had was international. And there are still real barriers for international tourists. I have family members in parts of Asia that frankly do not have the vaccine. So they're not coming here anytime soon. So you're not going to get from 2 to 65 million in like a 1 to 2 year period, realistically. Best case scenario in my mind is a 3 to 4 year period. So then you have these hotels, and your question is, do I want a hotel sitting empty for 2 to 3 years on the hopes that we end up utilizing it as a hotel, or should we just convert it? And I'm saying we should convert it. The same is true for some of the commercial office spaces that are more feasible. Some are more feasible than others in terms of conversions. But this is the big opportunity, Stephen. We cannot let this opportunity go. Like it would be a massive missed opportunity if we just sit around and like wait for these empty buildings to light up again while we're still trying to build affordable housing for thousands of New Yorkers.
You have little kids. I also have little kids your age. It has been a challenging time to educate them. It's challenging to educate them in the best of circumstances. Clearly, our population of children have fallen behind during this period of time. Can you talk a bit about your plans for education, how we catch them up, and with with the challenges we have ahead of us?
Thank you, Steve. It's been such a difficult time for parents. I also have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old's in public kindergarten. The 8-year-old's autistic and in a special needs school. So first, I want to say, just like Zoom is not our friend, online school is not our friend either. Online school is 30 to 70% less effective than in-person instruction. And if you're a parent, you probably have sensed this at some point, that it's really not as good. And that's just on the academic front. If you look at the social development, emotional development front, it's likely even worse than 30 to 70% worse. And then you have to account for the fact that 29% of New Yorkers don't have high-speed internet at home. And most of those schools are going to be black and brown with lower levels of income. And so we're failing the kids that need it the most at the highest levels. And when our children do come back to school, we should know that they're going to be suffering from learning loss, or in some cases, emotional issues or trauma or abuse, because in many cases, the school was a more positive environment for them than being in that apartment all day long. So I've called for 10,000 AmeriCorps tutors to help tutor 100,000 New York school children who are suffering from learning loss. I think we should look at summer school and longer school days to try and help kids catch up. We need to get more mental health workers and guidance counselors and social workers into our schools to try and help the kids who are going to be coming back with needs. Bigger picture, I want to empower our teachers and administrators to be able to do more for our children based upon what they're seeing. Like, they know our kids better than anyone other than the parent. I think it's really unfortunate that we've been outsourcing a lot of their ability to help our kids to a citywide testing regime. Now, I think, the only mayoral candidate who said getting rid of the G&T screening and the programs was not the right move because parents don't know what comes next. Like, you have a responsibility that if you're going to get rid of something, like, you have to tell people what comes next, because parents have to make decisions and have visibility. But at the same time, I do not think it's right that a teacher who sees a spark in a child has to have that child sit for a citywide test in order to have them in an enrichment program that they benefit from. There should be an enrichment program right in that school. The teacher can say, hey, like, that's where you're going to learn more. Special needs, same thing. Like, I have a son who's special needs, and teachers know it. Like, teachers should be able to make that kind of move for our child and have a program in that school. And I'm going to end this with my thinking on specialized high schools, which I think will be illustrative. I think it's crazy that if you have so many parents who want to get their kids in these selective high schools, that we just don't grow the pie and create new ones. I'm calling for 2 new selective high schools in each borough, in part because right now you have kids commuting more than an hour each way to school, which is not great for their learning. And so if we increase the capacity, and then we can keep using the SHSAT, but supplement it with grades, recommendations, interviews, essays, very common sense things, then we can have these schools represent the diversity of our community in a way that's not going to create the zero-sum game dynamic. So, Stephen, that's a bit long-winded, but hopefully that gives you a sense of how I'm thinking about our schools.
Perfect. And I look, you're on a Zoom full of people who have, many of which have spent their life in and around government. While you have been an entrepreneur, you've run a not-for-profit. It's a complicated system with a lot of long-term interests. How does an outsider like you come into government and manage something which is really very new and different than what you've ever done?
It's a great question, Stephen. And I just want to suggest to you all that I'm someone who understands the complexity of 67 agencies, 325,000 employees, that you can't just be in a boardroom and say, let's do this and expect it to get done. That these are very, very complicated issues that often are touching multiple agencies. So let's say street homelessness, which is something I've committed to reducing by over 50% in my first term. I think there are 7 different agencies that touch street homelessness, and that the people who are actually interacting with the homeless population are often not city employees, but they work for nonprofits. Maybe some of you work in these organizations, but nonprofits that the city contracts with. So I'm someone that understands that we're going to need a team of experienced government leaders and operatives, as well as people like myself who have different backgrounds, if we're going to get the city going again. The biggest danger for us is, frankly, continuing government dysfunction. And like, my first task as leader will be to say, okay, let's get the team in place that can actually get stuff done at the street level, at the ground level. And in the agency level, I know that's going to involve a lot of people who've been in city government for years and years. So there are probably people on this call that I'm going to want to enlist, honestly. Because, if you have like 67 agencies and 325,000 employees, like, you're going to need a whole layer of people with deep experience, either in those agencies or in ones like them.
So you mentioned homelessness. The city has grown the amount of money that it's spent on homelessness, and we've grown the amount of homeless in the city even before the pandemic. So how do you turn that around? And is that sort of like a symbol of, like, the budget has really grown a lot in the last few years? And so in terms of one, I'd love to ask you about homelessness and your plan there. And then second, like, how do you look at fiscal responsibility across this gigantic system if you let it?
Well, homelessness actually is a great issue for this because we are spending a lot of money on it. But it's a crisis that threatens to get worse if a lot of people end up getting evicted from their apartments. The economy is still very, very weak. So we've all heard the stories and about how much we're spending on individual homeless families, either by putting them up in hotel rooms in some cases, or even in our sheltering system. We're spending about $6,000 per year, per month, housing a family in our sheltering system in some locations. If we're spending $200 a night in a hotel room for a homeless person, that's also $6,000 a month. So there are very, very significant inefficiencies in our sheltering system. There are about 60,000 people in the sheltering system. When most people think of homeless, they think of this other population, which is street homelessness. So you have about 60,000 in the sheltering system. And then about 4,000 in the last count of street homelessness, but there's a 4.5 multiplier over a 12-month period. So the true number of street homeless people is somewhere between 4 and 18,000 per year. And the goal really, in my mind, when I say street homelessness, I'm focused on the second group. Because when most New Yorkers are walking around and they see someone on the street, that's what they think of as homeless. And someone who's on the street represents to me a policy failure. Like there's no one who looks up and says that's where someone belongs. It's bad on the human level and the health level, but it's also bad on an economic level and at its margins on the public safety level. The vast majority of street homeless people are perfectly harmless, but every once in a while, one will do something that winds up hurting someone and winds up on the headlines the next day. So we're spending over $2 billion addressing homelessness. And yet the street homeless population is rising. So what we have to do is increase our capacity for safe haven beds, for mental health beds. The number of mental health beds in New York City has gone down 14%, even as the needs have skyrocketed, in part because of hospital closures. We need to get more supportive housing online. And this is one of the failures of not having the mayor and the governor on the same page, is that the pipeline of supportive housing has stalled. So if you can improve capacity and then resource some of the nonprofits that are interfacing with the street homeless people every single day, then you can start to get the number down. And those are the mechanics. But when you're looking at the money, Stephen, I don't know if you all saw, but earlier this week, I implored Mayor de Blasio not to spend all the federal stimulus in year one because I said, look, this is going to be at least a 3-year recovery. Like, please don't spend it all in year one. And I'm thrilled to say he agreed with me. He said, yeah, that's right. Like, we shouldn't spend the money in year one. So when you're looking at the fiscal responsibility, again, we have a 1 to 2 year bridge because of federal aid. So we have to restart the engine of New York's economy and get our revenue heading up, and then try and get our expenses heading down while addressing the multiple challenges in our city. It's not going to be easy at all, but we have to try and do all three things at once. But I am a numbers guy. I'm very cognizant of the fact that we don't have unlimited runway.
We're with you on fiscal responsibility. You have Andrew Ryan, head of the CBC, on with us, who is keeps us all on the straight and narrow in terms of watching the budget. But I've asked you a bunch of wonky questions. I'm going to ask you if you want to get to know you a little better. Want to talk about you as a person. You're obviously a very excited and passionate New Yorker and candidate. You clearly believe the things you believe very strongly. I'd like to know a little about, where did that come from? Like, do you have a mentor? Did somebody influence you more than anyone else in life? Was there an experience that you feel kind of made you who you are today?
Wow, Stephen, I wish I had some childhood anecdote or something. That's like, when I can tell you a little bit about myself. Maybe there's a theme. But I am the son of immigrants. My parents met at UC Berkeley as graduate students. My father has a PhD in physics and generated 69 US patents for GE and IBM. And when I was old enough to figure out what a patent was, I went to him and I said, hey, how much do you get paid when you generate a patent? And I was waiting for it to be some really big number because it sounded super important. And he was like, I get paid about $250. And then I said, well, that doesn't sound like very much. And then he said, while I also get a salary so I can feed, house, and clothe you and your brother. and, then, and then I was like, oh, like, like sort of it clicked a bit for me. My parents immigrated to this country because they wanted a better life for me and my brother. And the message I got when I was growing up is, I think, very normal for a lot of immigrant kids, which is do well in school, get a good job. But when I started making a bit of money in my mid-20s, like I really asked myself, is this why my parents came to this country? So I could, make a bit of money. And it didn't seem like enough. And so I said, okay, like if this doesn't seem like the reason, maybe I should try and do something positive. So I started this. So the .com I founded tried to help nonprofits raise money more efficiently using the internet. And then I got drawn into trying to solve big problems. I think ideally entrepreneurs are driven by trying to solve a problem. And for those of you who work in nonprofits, I do want to share this. I started a nonprofit, and we know nonprofits run on passion. And so if you're the founder of a nonprofit, you're making the case for that nonprofit every day, and you're not allowed to talk about money. You're talking about ideas and a vision, but in the back of your mind, unfortunately, the money is always there. And so I spent 6.5 years running a nonprofit, and I got accolades and awards, but I had this sinking feeling that in order to truly address the problems I was trying to address with my organization, I would need something like 1,000,000 times more resources. And I think if you work at a nonprofit, you've had that experience. You're like, am I solving this problem? Like, I would need 1,000,000 times more. But then you can't express that all the time, because when someone helps you, you're grateful, you're appreciative. And so that's what drove me to run for president was, am I actually solving this problem? And in my case, I was trying to improve our economy and make it work for everyone in my mind. And I realized that that was only going to be possible if you did something really dramatic, like implement Dr. King's vision of a guaranteed minimum income. But that was impossible to execute on as an entrepreneur unless you did something really rash, like run for president, which when I decided to do so, um, you know, did not seem like an entirely lucid undertaking. But it made sense to me because, I'd spent years trying to solve this problem and there was no other way to solve the problem. And so, Stephen, when you ask like what drives me, it's like, I just want to make people's lives better and solve problems and improve our way of life. And for better or for worse, the public sector has to be the driver of that right now. That's just the way our society is. Like, you have the private sector, which is expert at solving market-driven problems. If you want to order food on your app, they've got you covered. And then you have nonprofits that are trying to solve these fundamental social problems, but are under-resourced by a factor of 1,000. And so then you have the public sector, which is frankly not working very well for us. And so then I had to make this difficult decision, and I'm kind of an introverted guy, though you might not believe that. Like, I don't have an intrinsic interest in the trappings of politics, but if you're going to solve the problem, you have to go through it. So I said, okay, like I can do that. And here we are. So I don't know if that's helpful in terms of what drives me.
Very much so. Can I ask, so you've now gone home twice to your family and said, I'm going to run for office. Once for president, once for mayor. Was one better received? Were both well received at home and by your family? They're like, you're nuts? Or they're like, finally?
Well, first, let me say how grateful I am to my wife, Evelyn, the rock of our family, every day. And I genuinely try to express that every single day. Literally, I'm just like, you're amazing. I thank you so much. Like, without her, our family wouldn't be a family. I mean, it's so. I will say that I don't think she took the presidential run very seriously initially. So in a way, that was like a series of conversations, because I was like, hey, what do you think about me running for president? And then she was like, I think one of her phrases was something like, I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing, in good humor. The mayoral run, though, she was immediately positive about, because she grew up in Queens. She went to Stuyvesant, she grew up in Bayside and Flushing. She's like New Yorker through and through. And so the fact that we could help New York City, she was immediately on board. Presidential, less so, honestly.
Okay, one final question. If you are elected on day one, what's the most important thing? What's the thing you sit down to do on day one that you feel would define an initial 100 days, let's say?
I'm all about team building and culture. And so the most important thing I can do on day one is try to make sure that we have the right people in the right roles. And if we don't, then we need to change that as quickly as possible. I also want to communicate a message of optimism and uplift and of our recovery to not just New Yorkers, but people around the world, letting them know that the greatest city in the world is open for business, it's open for tourism. You miss it. You want to come back. It's been too long, and we need you to come back.
Terrific. First, let me say thank you on behalf of Melvin and our entire Abney community for your time. I really want to say thank you for your passion. We are a group of people who believe strongly that this is the greatest city in the world, and our leaders should feel that and exude that every day and bring the whole world along. You clearly have that. And then I also want to just say something we've said to all the candidates. If elected, we hope to have the opportunity to work with you because we believe no matter who is elected, we want this place to be a great city for everyone. So
let's do it. Let's work together. Thank you, Abney. And Stephen, I'll say what I say to people who thank me on the street. Really, thank my wife if you see her. Appreciate it, everyone.
Nice, man.
Let's go, New York. We're going to do it.